Welcome back to Northwest City Politics in the Know with Juanita. We're glad that you're joining our show again this evening. We're always glad for people like you that are interested in what's happening in the cities in Northwest Community Television's viewing area. It is important for good government that cities, councils, city staff, and city residents have a back and forth flow of information. So we'll encourage you, if you have an area that we cover in one of our shows and it resonates with you, it's something that really interests you, do take the time to contact your mayors or your city council people and let them know how you feel about different issues, because it is important. Now, if you haven't watched our show before, each week we'll have somebody on from one of the 9 cities in our viewing area. And it's generally a mayor or a city council person who will be able to update us on what's happening in that city and what's going to be happening, so you'll be prepared for the future. And from time to time, we'll have different groups that interact with all of our cities. Now tonight, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We've had several people that have been talking with us about the issue of affordable housing. So we're going to hear from several people in our cities over the next couple of shows. The Metropolitan Council is responsible for dealing with the issue of affordable housing, and they have formulas and figures that they use, and they've, over the last year, they've put forward a number of amounts of affordable housing that they think different cities should add in the next 10 to 15 years. However, there is some controversy over that. Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, and Richfield all have a lawsuit going because they're saying that the formulas that they're using are putting more affordable housing in cities that already have it. So they're concerned about the process and how it goes. And each of our cities is handled differently. But tonight we'll go over, and the next night we'll go over a number of different cities and their thoughts on it. If this is an issue that interests you, do take the time to be in contact with your city. So we'll start with the mayors.
Another facet of the city government.
Right. So. Lots of interesting things. Well, now I've been talking with other people from other cities. The Metropolitan Council is setting targets. I think it's something about 2030, right? Mm-hmm. Is their slogan. But it's dealing with affordable housing in cities, and that they're giving quotas to different cities of how much affordable housing they should get by 2030. Now this action has brought some protests from your city, from Brooklyn Park, from Richfield, I believe, and probably some additional side ones, but particularly those 3 cities. Maybe you can talk about what the concerns are and then what steps your cities are taking.
Yeah, we have, I'll start with the steps we're taking first. We have put together a suit that names Minneapolis, St. Paul, Metro Council, and HUD at the federal level, to say that there's a disparity in how affordable housing is being built across the metro. And basically that disparity is that first-string suburbs like Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, Richfield, those that are not as affluent, is where most of the affordable housing is being built. And it hasn't always been that way. No. In the 80s and 90s, we were pretty good. We had good separation across the whole metro. But lately now, the Met Council, when they do their planning environments, have not, in our opinion, kept up with that ratio. So and they have a very complicated point system. But what happens is most of that new housing is being built in the first-string suburbs or in the downtowns, like Minneapolis. Brooklyn Center hasn't built one for a while, and because we're fully developed. And right now, even from Met Council's statistics, we're about 80% affordable housing already. But when you start looking at the second ring suburbs and starting getting out farther where what they call the white flight has been, there's no affordable housing.
Yeah, and that's the strange part, right?
Yes, yes. We know, and we see it as well, in our schools that all 4 school districts now are almost pretty much segregated.
Right.
People of color, blacks, Asian, non-whites, basically. And we know, and there's been more than a few studies that have been done to say that if you have a mixed group of kids in a school that come from affluent to poverty, that are mixed races, you know, as well, that they all do better.
Right.
Concentrating the poverty and the lower income people than in like Brooklyn Center in the school districts, that concentrates people of poverty who are not as affluent in those schools, and those kids don't do so well. So, you know,
So the negative aspects with concentrating poverty have a wider effect than just the schools, too. Maybe you could talk a little bit to that.
Yep, property taxes is a big one because now your property values start dropping because your neighborhoods start deteriorating. So you wind up with areas then that become blighted, basically, because of people just can't afford to keep their properties up and stuff. The ratio and the Met Council has a color-coded map that defines in red areas of poverty within Brooklyn Center, per se, and other cities as well. And when I look at that map, it's the whole Humboldt Avenue, the whole east side of the city, almost half the city is designated as already being a location of concentrated poverty.
By the Met Council.
By the Met Council, yes. So our part in the suit has been to say Brooklyn Center isn't going to build any higher density affordable housing. We've taken that tact for the last 2 comprehensive plans. And a comprehensive plan is done every 10 years.
And it's done via, you have to do it for the Met Council, right?
Yes, 2010 was one, and then there was one in the 90s as well, 1990s. And I was part of both of those. And the city's prevailing thought with those comprehensive plans is we have our share of affordable housing. And Met Council would always come back with, well, you should have higher densities, or the downtown Minneapolis should have higher densities, and that's where the new construction should go. And we take the view of, you know, we want our residents and our citizens, first of all, to embrace diversity. We want to see as little poverty as possible. And we certainly don't want it concentrated in areas where individuals have to live in blighted neighborhoods. So we've taken that tack. We've joined Ridgefield and Brooklyn Park in bringing that to light. One of the things that Met Council had in its plan and is still considering is when the blue line, the light rail, goes up the Botno Boulevard, they have in their plan that, well, people of poverty need transportation. Therefore, you should locate the lower income housing along those lines. Well, if you look at that line, that's right through the first ring suburbs again. Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, Ridgefield.
Kind of repeat.
Yes. So now they're just, you know, perpetuating that whole affordable housing thing and concentrating, you know, that lower income or people of poverty in certain areas.
So what kind of factors do you think should be taken into consideration instead of what they're doing now in terms of affordable housing in the metro area?
Well, I think Met Council and HUD both have good programs in place that need to be enforced. If they're enforced, you have a fair distribution
Okay.
of affordable housing, and everybody does better across the metro
Right.
then. But they haven't, and that's part of the suit, they
Okay,
haven't been
right.
following those rules like they did in the 80s and 90s.
Their own rules.
Their own
Okay.
rules, yeah, absolutely. And that tact had changed. So now that with their complicated point system and how they award monies for low income to the developers, well, the point system comes out to be downtown Minneapolis or first ring suburbs. You get out in the second ring suburbs and it's almost zero for points. And
Right.
it's just not a fair and equitable algorithm that they
Right.
have to do that.
Right.
So.
And then just real briefly, you were telling me about there was a recent Supreme Court ruling regarding Texas and HUD. How do you think this might affect the whole process?
Yeah, we have a professor at the University of Minnesota in the law school, Myron. I can't think of his last name now. But anyway, Oldfield.
Yeah.
Orfield, excuse me. He has studied this issue across the United States, where it has occurred, and it's not only here in Minnesota.
Right. Yeah, this is not a one-time thing.
And you mentioned Texas. He knows the city in Texas that brought the suit, similar to what we're doing, and has compared what we have for housing densities to what they had.
Right.
They took it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, yes, you're right. There's not a fair and equitable distribution of lower income housing. And it's almost identical to what we have here in Brooklyn Center, or the first ring metro.
Right.
So we're going to continue with it. I was just in Washington about 10 days ago for a Build One America summit. And that summit basically talked about affordable housing and how that fair and equitable distribution should be. Dr. Myron Orfield was there as well. He was one of the major speakers, but I met people from HUD, assistant directors. I met the investigator who is out of Chicago, who's looking into what we're alleging for the suit and stuff. So, and there was a lot of people from across the United States that were there that see the same issues. So it was a nice place to make contact.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
Yep.
So we'll have to just keep watching this issue and see what happens.
Yes.
The Metropolitan Council, this is just from reading in the paper, is setting, they've got a whole Thrive, I can't remember the name of it. Do you remember the name?
I think it's Thrive
it's looking
2030.
Thrive 2030. And then part of that is they're setting goals for affordable housing for different areas.
Right.
And there's a little controversy about that, in particularly with Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, and Richfield, as I believe.
Right.
And so I thought, well, maybe we could find out what's happening in the different cities. So what is the target for affordable housing for Maple Grove, approximately?
I think that the number over the expansive sort of 2030 time period was around 1,700 units, if I recall right. And I'm not sure if those were actually designated as affordable housing units or high density units. But certainly they have a goal that they've set out as affordable. I know that Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center and Richfield are very upset about those numbers because they believe they already had significant affordable housing in their communities, and really they, a good example is Brooklyn Park. They've really struggled over the last few years to try and sort of eliminate some of those massive housing projects that existed historically there that really caused them some issues.
Oh, definitely. Lots of big problems. How much affordable housing is there in the city of Maple Grove? Well, if you're going to look at it percentage-wise.
I'm not sure what the percentage is because it sort of differentiates from year to year. I think that really this year probably the number will be, for example, in a home would be a home that would be probably around $170,000, $180,000 home. What they do is they base it on a calculation of the size of your family. Percentage of the median income. I think it's usually 60% of the median income. So that's I think the median income in the metropolitan area is around $60,000. So, that's what they base it on, and then you go forward from there.
Affordable to the average person then, right?
Right. Well, so what they do is they say average median income is, let's say it's $60,000. We're going to say that affordable housing constitutes someone who makes 60% or less of that $60,000 for a family of four. So that it's, if you make $36,000 or less a year and you have a family of four, you sort of qualify for that sort of affordable housing, or that's the dollars that are involved.
Right. And that's the group that the Met Council is looking to provide more of.
And then they do a calculation on what you could afford for housing, and that sort of then determines a house that you can buy for that amount of money or rent for that amount of money constitutes affordable housing.
So what is Maple Grove doing in that area, or?
I think that we've been sort of actively involved over the last few years with a series of developers who have provided, significant new affordable housing in the community. One just opened last summer. And, we also have historically purchased a series of homes and refurbished them ourselves. And we rent them out in the city. It's what's called our scattered site housing program. And then the county has a similar scattered site housing program. And then we've also worked together with a local community group to try and help fund sort of, one of the real aspects of affordable housing is the land costs. And so there's a land community trust fund that we've worked with to provide some write-downs in land costs for certain properties that allows a family then to purchase that house or live in that house. So those are the main things we've done.
And if you go back in time, the stress on that kind of housing was in large big developments, right? If you go back to, the 60s or 70s?
Right. I mean, I think that you look historically, communities have developed in a fashion, and, at times affordable housing has been difficult to obtain because of the cost of land. I mean, I know that if you really go back about 20 years, 15 years in Maple Grove, land costs were so high and development costs are so high that it was very hard to find developers that were willing to build and stay within that affordable range because they couldn't afford to do it. And so, the reality is that if you're going to, really promote affordable housing, you have to be able to have a governmental mechanism to provide for funding for that source of housing, because it's not going to happen all that easily in the open market because of the cost of land.
Well, and people say to cities, why don't you do this or why don't you do that in terms of development or building, but you can only do what somebody's willing to come in and do.
Right, and the reality is we don't have the financial wherewithal to do some of these types of projects. The money, over the last 5-10 years, especially for cities, I mean, finances have been difficult. I mean, a city like Maple Grove doesn't receive any local government aid. So whatever we have to budget accordingly because we know we're not receiving any money from the state. So when you hear about local government aid, Maple Grove receives zero. And so we're not going to receive local government aid. And so, really our tax dollars have to go to running our city itself.
Now, what factors do you think cities need to consider when they're setting targets for things like affordable housing?
I think that a good example is you can work with developers and get them to do certain types of aspects to their projects, or sometimes include percentages of affordable units in a project that you can do. But I think that you have to really look at what your city can afford to do, how your city's already been developed. I mean, a city like Brooklyn Center or Richfield or Brooklyn Park, I think, has to be looking to their long-term tax base and what realistically should go in their community versus other communities might be different. And so, it isn't a one-size-fits-all type project. I think it really has to be designed by cities who are really best able to respond to the local government or the local community needs.
Yeah, because there's kind of always a rub with the Metropolitan Council, and its importance in helping the whole area develop, plus the individual cities and.
Well, I mean, I think that the Metropolitan Council has some things that they've done over the recent years that I would disagree with.
Right,
I mean,
right.
I've expressed my concerns historically over, for instance, their transit plan.
Yeah, we
you
talked
know,
about that earlier.
Well, you know,
Right,
where
right.
really, when you look at the northwest suburbs, they don't have a good transit plan for us. I mean, Plymouth, Maple Grove, some of the neighboring outlying communities,
Right.
there is no plan on their map for transit for us. So,
right.
you know, I know that we have opt-out systems, but,
Right.
you know, I don't understand why the opt-out systems
Yeah.
don't show up on how the system is going to function
In
overall.
the overall, right.
Right, and it should, and, you know, they don't do that. And so, you know, a good example is the light rail that we talked about
Right.
privately before, about, you know, going to Botna Boulevard, and where does that really
Right.
develop over the years? They should have a
Right.
long-term plan that shows that this light rail is going to, for instance, maybe go to Rogers.
Right.
At the same railroad tracks that
Yeah.
are already there. And there's certain plans like that that I think they could have a better vision for. I know that their vision really is to see increased higher densities in the
definitely.
inner urban core, and that doesn't correspond to what we as the outlying suburbs
Right,
need
right.
or need to hear from them.
The Metropolitan Council has a process going called Thrive 2040 because they're making plans for the future. And part of that planning is on how much affordable housing is needed in the area.
Yes.
And they're charged with that responsibility. And so they've come up with amounts that they've delegated to the different cities. And Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, and Richfield, and I think maybe Coon Rapids recently, all are kind of protesting, saying the amounts that you came up don't agree with amounts we think should be there. So I'm taking some time with all of the shows to
Okay.
have people respond to that, to talk about that a little bit. There's a target, but you were saying you weren't quite sure what Crystal's target were. How does Crystal line up in the amount of affordable housing that you have?
You know, we have plenty of affordable housing. We meet their what they think we should have
Right.
without a problem.
Right.
There's no. That's why we didn't talk about it very much. So that's why it's not at the front of my mind. We have experienced some projections from Met Council
Okay.
that aren't exactly attainable. For example, population.
Okay.
Population, they expect us to increase our high density housing to the point where we're building a new apartment complex every year. You know, and we currently have a project, the Kavanaugh. It's a that will be opening. Oh boy, the models are open now. That'll be opening up in August, I think. So people will be moving in. But that's a huge project. It's 130 units
yes.
where the Kavanaugh School used to be. And we would have to have one of those projects every year between now and 2040 in order to reach the density that they're thinking of. Right. And, you know, we wrote them and said, look, this is not a realistic thing for us. And same thing with the affordable housing. They're dealing with the same issues we are.
Right.
For that population goal. We have a fully developed community.
Right.
They're owned by businesses or private people.
The city doesn't own them.
The city doesn't own them. We
Right.
can't just walk in and take them over.
Right.
Or we won't just
Right.
walk in
No.
and take them over, even if we could. So, yeah, some of those things are very hard to attain, even if they wanted to.
Right.
But if Richfield and Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park are protesting about that, yeah, I would support their protest because it's real hard to take something that's mandated from above and implement that when the people and citizens don't want to sell,
Right.
don't want to move,
Right.
don't want to see the high
Right.
density. You know, so you always have this back and forth between top-down government and bottom-up, you know, and that's the big struggle.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't remember which city it was, but somebody said, we don't build the developments. a developer has to
Right.
decide they want to do the affordable housing
Right.
in our particular location.
You know, there's things cities can do in their EDAs or their
Right.
organizations to
Right.
promote that type of stuff. And, you know, I think we do in Crystal as well, but there's just, it's not something that we're going to try to eliminate some single-family house neighborhoods and create an area where there's a very high density.
Right.
It's-
Right.
We're not gonna do
What
that.
kind of factors do you think should go into what's kind of an appropriate amount of high-density housing in any given area, or particularly your city?
There's going to be a large push for high-density housing around the LRT.
Oh, right, right.
And, you know, at some point in time, if that becomes attractive to
Uh-huh.
developers, if they're able to finesse
Right.
a deal and do that, that's great. A lot of the meetings that I talked about earlier in the groups, they're talking about changing the zoning to allow that.
Ah.
And, you know, it's not necessarily what Crystal wants
right,
to do
right,
or what
right.
Crystal's doing. Quite honestly, most of the zoning around the light rail, it will handle pretty much whatever whatever redevelopment
Right.
needs to happen there
Right.
anyway. So we're not real concerned about it.
But it just shows there's, you know, different conflicts. One size doesn't always fit all.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
So as it works its way out, hopefully it all, everybody can be satisfied in something in the long run.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I think in the long run we're going to be just fine in Crystal,
Uh-huh.
and with or without the high density housing, or with
Right.
or without the light rail, it's gonna be okay.
Right. We're glad that you've joined us for our show this evening. I hope that you've heard something about the issue of affordable housing that adds to your knowledge, or something that you have questions about. Now, the best places to get information would be going to your city staff. They can give information for you. Calling your mayors or council people to see what your city is doing in this particular area. You can also contact the Metropolitan Council, because there are people that represent different areas, and you can find the ones that represent our area and get information, because it is an important issue for the future. So we're glad that you've been with us, and we hope you'll come back and join us again next week for part 2 on affordable housing from from City Council and mayors in our area. Hi, I'm Juanita Hoff from Northwest City Politics Show. We have big news to share with you. We are improving our show by moving our program to high definition. Starting in November of 2015, you can view our show in HD on Channel 19 at 8:30 p.m. on Wednesdays. Our show times are also listed in the cable guide for DVR recording if you want to do that. You can also view current and past programs on our YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/user/NWCT We're happy to have you as our viewers, and we hope you'll continue watching our show. Bye. Bye.